Welcome to the Read, Talk, Grow podcast, where we explore health topics through books. Our topic today is leaking aneurysms and treatment with interventional radiology. Our book is In My Time of Dying, How I Came Face to Face with the Idea of an Afterlife by Sebastian Junger. I'm your host, Dr. Denise Milstein. I'm an assistant professor of medicine at Mayo Clinic, where I practice women's health, internal medicine, and integrative medicine. I am so excited about my guests today. Sebastian Junger is an award-winning American journalist, author, and filmmaker with much of his work focused on war, survival, and the human condition. He's the winner of a Peabody Award and the National Magazine Award for reporting. His memoir, In My Time of Dying, is his latest book. Sebastian, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Dr. Indravadan Patel is an assistant professor of radiology and a board-certified interventional and diagnostic radiologist. He's the chair of vascular and interventional radiology at Mayo Clinic in Arizona. His clinical focus includes expertise in management and treatment of vascular malformations. Dan, welcome to Read, Talk, Grow.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
In My Time of Dying is a medical and contemplative memoir of the author's brush with death after experiencing abdominal pain at his remote home in New England that brought him closer to death than he could have expected from a ruptured leaking aneurysm that the author was unaware was present. Okay, you both know how Read Talk Grow works. We discuss books that portray health topics in an effort to better understand health experiences through story. In this case, we'll talk about aneurysms and also coming close to death. Sebastian, I kept hearing about your book, even had an old friend from college tell me she was anticipating reading it and thought it would be perfect for Read, Talk, Grow. And then I saw you at the Tucson Festival of Books, and I knew she and all the others were right. So thank you again for being here. We know this is memoir, so your inspiration for the story is known, but tell us how you knew you had to write this memoir this time.
Yeah, I mean, I've been a journalist and a war reporter for much of my life. That's now in my past, but I'm used to not focusing on myself. I'm the vehicle for information. I'm not the point of the story. And this was the first time in my life where I was the story. I'd been killed a number of times overseas in war zones, but really the closest I ever came to dying, I think, was almost certainly, in my own driveway and in the hours that followed in the rush to get to the ER. So when I recovered, I think I surprised the doctors by surviving. Read the tea leaves here, like I got the sense that they were prepared for me to not make it. So that was very traumatic for me, way more traumatic than combat. And it took some months, even a couple of years psychologically to recover. The physical recovery was easy, but psychologically it took a couple of years. And eventually I thought, I write about everything that's compelling and interesting to me. And this suddenly became very compelling and interesting, not just what happened to me medically and the sort of miracle of technology and expertise that saved my life, but this sort of weird enigma of like, do we really know what happens after we die? I'm an atheist, I'm a rationalist, I'm all that stuff, right? And I just, yeah, lights go out, you're done, like, good night. My mind was open to the possibility that maybe there's something else. And I don't mean something religious or Christian. I mean something that we fundamentally don't understand about quantum reality and about consciousness and life and death.
Yeah, these are big questions that have been asked throughout time and probably will be asked throughout time. And we're so glad that you captured your experience and considered this in this book. So thank you for bringing it to us. Dan, tell us your reaction to the book and also what it's like to be an interventional radiologist.
Like you, Dr. Milstein, I also heard about the book and read the book. Just, it was definitely a page turner. The medical part was, super interesting, and just you're coming to the realization that you actually are dying, even though, as you mentioned in the past, your book so vividly paints many different pictures of your quote unquote brushes with death, whether wartime, whether surfing, whether being alone in the middle of a cold winter in Spain in the middle of nowhere. But this one moment really captures the true essence of what it means to maybe be alive or to maybe know what death is. I found it very interesting. And then beyond that, like you mentioned, sort of that metaphysical stuff. I found that super interesting. I'm a nerd and a geek when it comes to that type of stuff. And you definitely made it very palatable and easy to read and digest for lay people and even people that just, have an interest in it. Very, very great read.
Thank you. Yeah, sometimes I would get comments from people. They'd be like, "Oh, I loved your book," but they'd almost apologize. I don't understand quantum physics. I'm like, "Look, you're in good company. Neither did Schrodinger, right? Like, and neither do quantum physicists. They know that there is something very puzzling happening at the quantum level, but they have no idea how or why. And so, if you don't understand quantum physics, you're in very good company. It is in some ways, the ultimate mystery."
Yeah, and I love how you sort of tackle that and go back and forth between some of your personal experiences, some of your familial life. And, for me, reading the book, I sort of hung on to a lot of the medical jargon and medical terms. And, as an interventional radiologist, that came natural and easy for some of the listeners or people interested in the book. An interventional radiologist, we do lots of interesting, amazing things that in the quantum physics world just is bewildering to many. And, we use these techniques and these technologies to minimally guide catheters or wires into places within the body that you didn't know you could get to treat, in your case, an aneurysm, to open up a blocked artery, to get rid of blood clot if you have, something in the lungs. It's just a great, fascinating field which just keeps evolving. I found your relationship between a lot of those different aspects very fascinating.
Yeah, and I'm eternally grateful because my understanding is that in the sort of old days before interventional radiology, the solution to something like what I had would be to cut the person's abdomen open them up, and try to find the bleed. I had a aneurysm that had ruptured, and I was gushing blood into my own abdomen, and you'd have to sort of operate on them in the OR and try to find the bleed and cauterize it or seal it before the person bled out, and the outcomes weren't great for that procedure. You can imagine. Someone's already compromised. I'd lost half my blood by the time I finally got to the hospital an hour and a half later. I'd probably lost half my blood. And you send me into the OR, that's an uphill fight for me, for my body at that point. So interventional radiology, I mean, I'd never heard of it before this, right? But afterwards, like, oh my God, it's basically magic. Like, you can enter someone's vascular system in their groin, and then where do you want to go? You want to go in their brain? You can go in their brain. You want to go to their heart? You want to go, where do you want to go? It's like the interstate system, get on I-90 in Boston, you want San Diego, Seattle, you pick it, right? And you can do that without cutting someone open and fix the problem. And that's it's just mind blowing. And it saved my life. My little daughters, who are now 8 and 5, they were 3 years old and 6 months old at the time, they will have a father. And because of what you guys do, it's totally extraordinary.
Appreciate that. And just to highlight some things that you said, you mentioned the interstate. Whenever I talk to patients or people about what interventional radiology does, I liken it to, all roads lead to Rome, the Anglo-Saxon version, right? I could also say all roads lead to Istanbul or something else. I think in your book you had mentioned they tried one approach. You mentioned the femoral artery, but in fact, they actually had to go through your radial artery, which is in your wrist, to actually get the quote unquote job done, just because of how challenging and varied your anatomy was and different from, some other patients. Every human being is unique, and your story is definitely unique.
I want to just make sure readers understand what that looks like, Dan. So many of us will think of a radiologist. My husband is a radiologist as somebody who sits in a dark room and looks at pictures all day. It's more complicated than that. When my husband listens to this, I'm not saying that's all he does, but that's, I think, what we imagine a radiologist to do. And they're a physician who many patients never see. They might see the name on a report, but they don't see them face to face almost all the time. Where an interventional radiologist actually does see the patient face to face. And you're someone who gets called in for procedures. And in this case, maybe we'll focus on this situation for emergencies. So you carry a pager, an old school pager, and it goes off when somebody like Sebastian is coming into the hospital with what is suspected to be a bleeding aneurysm. What are other situations where you might get that page and you know, I got to get there and be ready to go?
Call can be taxing, call can be brutal. The call is also very rewarding. You are there in times of patients' needs, in times of family members' needs, in time of your fellow colleagues, your referring, physicians, providers, nurses. So it can be very, very satisfying to help patients in need in their time of need. Situations that are commonplace do tend to be things like bleeding aneurysms, blockages in arteries where you may have to go in to the vascular system and open up an arterial system to allow blood perfusion to get to a critical structure like an organ or a limb. Other situations include removing clot, whether that is in your lungs, like a pulmonary embolism, or in your brain, like in stroke. Certain situations call for different techniques, whether you're coiling, plugging, stenting, ballooning. These are all different types of instruments to get the job done. Sometimes the procedures are fairly straightforward and can take 10, 15, 20 minutes. And then sometimes they can be challenging and complex and can take 3, 4, 5 hours. It is very fascinating, and complex, and varied, which makes the job, and I hate to use the word job, but it makes what I do very fascinating and rewarding and interesting. Seeing the patient on the other end of it or the family member on the other end of it really keeps it going, and call isn't as burdensome or isn't as taxing when you get those types of situations.
I was at a convention of interventional radiologists in Nashville a couple of months ago, the yearly gathering, and one young man came up to me and he said, "Thank you so much for writing your book. I'm going to give it to my mother. She still thinks I'm the guy who pushes the clacker in the X-ray room." Like that. So he was appreciative that I was going to clear that up. But, it makes me wonder, like, can you have a glass of wine at dinner? I mean, I mean, if you're always prepared to rush in and save someone's life, you're driving there presumably. Like, that must really constrain your life. I mean, that must be tough.
Yeah, no, great question. So yes, there are strict rules and policies. I work at Mayo Clinic. We follow, certain rules, just like many hospital systems do. But correct, you do have to be within half an hour or so of the hospital facility, and you do have to be sort of cognizant and aware that at any moment you could be called. And you have to review, imaging, talk to referring teams, see a patient, see a family member, talk through what is happening and why a certain procedure is or isn't needed. Sometimes we intervene by recommending against a procedure or recommending against doing something because that isn't always the best solution. So yeah, it can be, deeply rewarding, but without question, there are the other facets of being, on call and being available.
It's interesting for the patient, unlike surgery, I was awake the whole time. I mean, I was watching the doctors work on me. My vital signs were too low to be fully sedated. I think I had a little fentanyl in me, but I was completely conversant and aware. And so I got to sort of watch this drama, which was good and bad. It took a long time for me to realize that I might die. And I finally realized that on the fluoroscope, listening to the doctors talk about what to do and how this didn't work and that didn't work. And like, what are we going to do now? And it's dawned on me.
Let's hit the pause because I do want to talk about the book and how you got to that point. Because for listeners who haven't read the book yet, what I wanted to say to you, Dan, is that that list of things that you do in the context of your professional life made me think, all listeners are thinking right now, I hope to never have to meet this type of doctor, but I am so glad that they exist in case I should need them. So, really, gratitude for what you do. But, Sebastian, can you go to that day? So, you live in a remote area of Cape Cod. This is 2020. So, you are really in a situation where you are pretty far from medical care and had these lingering symptoms. But that day, it became clear that you knew something was terribly wrong. I liked this quote from your book. I was young and had no idea the world killed people so casually. Will you just bring our listeners to that day and what happened that led you to the hospital?
Yeah, so the property is in the end of a dead end dirt road in the woods. There's no cell phone service. The landline is old, so when it rains, the line's short out. It's basically paradise in a lot of ways, unless you have a ruptured aneurysm. And when we're an hour drive from the nearest hospital, which is a small regional hospital, right? And so I'd had pain intermittently in my abdomen for about 6 months. And, it wasn't terrible pain, but it got my attention. And, I should have gone to get it checked out, but just whatever. I didn't get there. And then one night, right before dawn, I had a terrifying dream that I had died, that I was already dead, that I was a spirit. I was watching my family grieve and I was trying to reach out to them and they couldn't hear me and they couldn't see me. And I was made to understand that it was too late. I was dead. And I woke up in a terrible fright. I didn't know such a dream was possible. And 36 hours later, I was dying. And I don't know how that works. Does the unconscious mind understand bodily processes? Was that, I don't know what that meant, but it was a singular experience. So the way I knew something was very wrong, like in mid-sentence, I was talking to my wife and we had a little bit of babysitting and we were in a cabin that was even more remote that I'd built deeper into the woods. And we were there for a little, like checkout time. And this is during COVID. And in mid-sentence, I felt this pain shoot through my abdomen. And it wasn't unbearable, but it was bizarre, right? It's kind of searing pain and I couldn't get rid of it. And I stood up to sort of try to work it out, walk it out, and I almost fell over. And my blood pressure was plummeting. I didn't know this, but my blood pressure was plummeting. I sat back down. I said to my wife, I'm going to need help. And I'm fit. I'm a lifelong athlete. I'm not a walking heart attack. I use the same belt loop that I did in college on my belt. Whatever. And I didn't understand, and I couldn't stand up. And my wife sort of dragged me out of the woods and called 911, and it took quite a while for them to get there. And by that time I was going blind. My hemoglobin levels were so low that it was producing sort of blindness, and I was syncopic. I was in and out of consciousness. And I didn't know that I was in and out of consciousness, but my wife was watching me go in and out, and she realized, oh, he might go out and not come back. I mean, she knew she was maybe watching me die. Thank God I did not know that. And the ambulance crew showed up, and by then I'd gone into compensatory shock and I sort of revitalized. I was clear-minded. I could see again. Still had pain in my abdomen, considerable pain, but I was clear me. I was me again, and I almost was like, I don't need to go to the hospital. I'm good. And my wife said, no, 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 you're taking him to the hospital. And I remember thinking at that moment, this is why they say married men live longer. This is the reason for that statistic, right? I'm living it right now. Like I just watched it happen in real time. So they put me in the ambulance and, I don't think those guys thought I needed to go to the hospital either, right? I mean, they were sort of on my side, like, yeah, you're probably all right. And an hour later, I needed 10 units of blood. My blood pressure was 60 over 40 by the time they got me to the trauma bay. I'm still conscious, but I've probably lost something like half my blood, which is right at the dividing line where they can bring you back or not. Like I'm right on the cusp. They started putting they rushed me into the trauma bay and put a large gauge cordis line into my neck, a needle through my neck into my jugular to transfuse me. So I'm lying there and I'm an atheist. I'm a rationalist. My father was an atheist and a physicist, which is like atheist squared, right? So that's who's lying in the trauma bay. That's me. I'm like, I don't believe in anything you can't measure or test, as my father would say. So I'm lying there, and suddenly this black pit opens up underneath me, and I'm getting pulled into it. It's like the universe is cracked open and I'm getting pulled into this sort of infinite void, and I'm terrified of it. I have no idea I'm dying, like absolutely none, right? But I'm terrified of this blackness. And as I panic, suddenly my dead father appears above me, to my left and above me. And basically, he's there in this sort of energy form, this sort of essence. And he communicates with me by some manner. It's not speech, right? I don't know what, but communicates to me. Basically, it's okay. You don't have to fight it. You can come with me. Right? I know how to do this. I'll take care of you. And I was absolutely horrified. I'm like, you're dead. I'm alive. The party's over here. Like, why would I go with you? Right? You got this all wrong. I'm just in for belly pain. Like, you're misunderstanding this situation. We'll talk a lot later. That's not what's happening right now. And of course, that is what was happening. While my father is there petitioning me to go with him, I said to the doctor, you got to hurry. I'm going. I'm going away. Like, I'm leaving. They transfused me, and after I'd stabilized, they got me into the interventional radiology suite, and then the real work began of seeing if they could save my life.
So incredible that you, by a matter of moments, were able to get care. Dan, what are your thoughts about those paramedics? I mean, it's easy in retrospect to say clearly there was an emergency, but when you have a young, fit person with abdominal pain on a hot summer day who sort of comes back to themselves and is like dismissive, that would have been a really easy situation for those paramedics to say, "Drink some fluids and call us back if you had any problems," and that would have been life-ending. Do you agree?
Oh, yeah, without question. There are many parts to life which are mysterious and fascinating, and how just one little shift in your thinking, had your wife not said, no, take him, had the paramedic not agreed to come in on time, had you been stuck in traffic. I've been to Cape Cod. I know how traffic can be very, very brutal on certain days. There's really only one way in, one way out. Had an interventional radiologist not been at that hospital, even though there are, let's say, 1,200 of us, around the country, certain areas you may have to go 6 hours before you get to an interventional radiologist. So there are many, many little parts to your story where it was life and death. But luckily, or by the grace of XYZ, by whatever you want to say or believe in, you made your way to the interventional radiology suite, again, after getting stabilized by the paramedics, by the ED physicians, by that jugular line that you mentioned, the cordis, getting you blood transfusions. It eventually made it to interventional radiology suite, and then again, complex anatomy, finding the bleed, and eventually stopping that bleed from persisting and continuing, so that way you can pretty much come back to.
Hey, listeners, we hope you're enjoying this episode of Read, Talk, Grow. If you find our discussions helpful and insightful, please take a moment to subscribe to and rate Read, Talk, Grow on your preferred podcast platform. And don't forget to tell your friends to listen. Your support will help us reach more readers and those eager to learn about health through books. As always, feel free to drop us a line at readtalkgrow@mayo.edu with suggestions for books, topics, or any comments. Thanks for listening. I feel like there's another healthcare professional who's really important at this point in the story, which is the ER physician. You describe them as sitting towards the ambulance bay so that they have eyes on patients as they're coming in. And Dan, I felt like there was this just gut reaction, sick, not sick. Can you tell listeners about that? And is that a real thing? And is that really important?
Oh yeah, without question, Denise, as you know, having been in medicine for 12 plus years, almost 15 years, right? If you count training and everything, you can tell, just like the ED physicians, just like seasoned nurses, they are our eyes and ears when a patient is kind of going downhill or it doesn't look good. You can kind of tell. There are certain looks, certain sounds, certain skin changes, sweating, sometimes not sweating. There's many little interesting, intricate facets to the human body and spirit when they're kind of teetering between life and death. So yeah, it's without question fascinating, and why many ED physicians and providers sort of are situated in that manner to see who's really sick and who needs assistance right away.
And, just to note, the patient themselves might be is a very unreliable witness here, right? Like, not only is your brain compromised by whatever's going on, I wasn't thinking clearly. I was thinking like a drunk or something. You know what I mean? I was like very sort of confused, but also I had no reason to think I was dying, right? Like, we think of dying as this big catastrophic experience. I just had belly pain, right? And I was like, what? I mean, I thought at the very worst, I'm like, I might wake up tomorrow morning after an operation to find out that I have a tumor in my abdomen and I got 3 months to live, and this might be really, really miserable, right? But I had no idea this was going down right now. Why would I think that? So the patient themselves, I think, often has no idea what the stakes are. And when the doctor asked permission to put the cortice line into my jugular, it didn't sound very pleasant. And I was like, you got to represent yourself with the doctor, you got to whatever. So I was like, you mean in case there's an emergency? That was my question to him. And he was like, sir, this is the emergency right now. Well, that was news to me. I had absolutely no idea that this was an emergency. I mean, I basically was like, well, if you say so, do what you got to do, but we'll see. Like, that was my attitude about it. And in some ways, thank God. I mean, the whole thing would have been so much more terrifying had I thought I might be dying right now. And I may never see my family again. I mean, just unbearable thought, right? I mean, they would have reproduced the dream that I'd had. Absolutely anguishing thought. And I'm so glad that I was spared that.
The story that you painted, it was compelling to read because it gives the patient perspective of the medical side of things. You sort of pointed out just a little while ago, you're kind of in and out of consciousness, you're in compensatory shock, you don't feel great, and then all of a sudden you're back into and with it. You question whether or not this is a real emergency. You're like, oh, it's just belly pain. Maybe it's an ulcer. It could be a tumor, but I've lived a good life. I still got some time. There are many things that are going on through your head. And just like on the patient side, on the medical side, we also are going through these, not necessarily checklists, but things that we think you and your symptoms and body presentation may represent. So it's an interesting dichotomy and dance that the patient and the medical team kind of go through.
Another interesting thing here is that, I mean, I was 58 years old at the time. I read young, I'm an athlete, I'm a healthy person, right? So the guys in the ambulance sort of misdiagnosed me because apparently what happens if you're experiencing blood loss, your heart rate goes up to compensate for the loss of blood pressure that you're experiencing through blood loss. And so suddenly you're up 30 beats a minute or whatever to sort of pressurize the system, right? Well, I was a 58-year-old with a pulse of 58 or whatever. Like, I mean, I have a really low pulse because I'm a lifelong athlete. So when they read my pulse at, what was I, probably in the 80s, I'm sure they were like, oh, well, that's normal, right? So the sort of combination that I was presenting with, they didn't realize was the classic outlines of abdominal hemorrhage because, having a pulse of 80 in your late 50s isn't that abnormal. And so I mean, what's an important thing probably for those guys, the sort of first responders, to say, what's your ordinary pulse? Because if they'd known I was up 30 points, they might have suddenly thought, oh my God, this is an emergency. Like, he's bleeding out.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And we often will in medicine say treat the patient, not the numbers. So even though 80 is normal, 80 might not be normal for you. And that takes somebody stepping back and looking at the whole picture. Dan, there are very few things that take down a young, middle-aged, healthy man in this way. So it feels like as Sebastian arrives, there's this thought something is bleeding. And a nurse, paraphrasing here, whispers to you, Sebastian, you didn't hear it from me, but it's not your aorta, which you didn't know was, good news to hear. And she thought she was giving you like a piece of relief. But can you just talk about that, Dan, and how that would have been a very different situation and also a much more common situation? And then maybe this is a good time to talk about what actually was found to be bleeding and why.
The aorta is the biggest artery that comes directly off of your heart, and it provides the blood flow to basically the rest of your body. There's the upper thoracic aorta, which gives rise to arteries that feed and perfuse your brain, your head and neck, your upper extremities. And then as it works its way down to the diaphragm and below in your abdomen, it gives arteries and supply to your abdominal organs like your liver, your spleen, your pancreas, kidneys, and bowel. And then it further goes down to go to your lower extremities. The aorta, if that had a rupture or an aneurysm or a dissection in it with blood loss and leakage, extravasation, it would be a much different story because, as you put it in your book, Sebastian, it sounds like you did a lot of research, which we can talk about in a minute. Without question, most patients would die in the field at home. A good number of patients, if they even make it to the paramedic, might die there. They may also die in the hospital. Very, very few patients actually make it out of the hospital when they have injury to their aorta, where it's ruptured and frankly bleeding. What you were found to have was a smaller aneurysm, which is just an outpouching or weakening of the wall of one of the smaller arteries surrounding the pancreas. You had an interesting condition though, because you mentioned, being young, being athletic pretty much your whole life. Your ligaments that sort of support your diaphragm, your median arcuate ligament, it became strong and robust, and this usually happens in younger patients. Because of that strong robustness of that median arcuate, it caused compression and narrowing on your celiac artery, which is the first artery that comes off of your abdominal aorta. That celiac artery gets supplied to your upper abdominal organs like your liver, your pancreas, and your spleen. Typically, we'd want to get into the celiac artery with our little catheter and wire using X-ray to guide to that little aneurysm that you had in your pancreatical duodenal arcade or your gastroduodenal arcade. Sorry for all the long medical jargon, but basically one of those little arteries that are supplying your pancreas. Because that area was blocked, we had to find a circumvent and try to find a different path to get there, and then to coil or block the arteries. Coils, you can imagine just like mattress spring coils, but very, very micro in scale, millimeters in scale.
So you've got this long tubing, you've got this guide wire that's making the tubing stiff so that you can, going back to the highway analogy, drive from the entry point in the body up to where the artery is bleeding. But you talk in the book, Sebastian, about how there was this decision point whether they were going to have to take you to the OR, the operating room, because they just couldn't get there. And it was really the creativity of the experienced physicians at the bedside to say, let's take one more approach and try to come from a different part of the highway to get there. And indeed, that is what they were able to do. And that is where they saved your life.
Yeah, so I was on a fluoroscope, which gives, my understanding is it gives sort of X-ray video of what's going on in your body and sort of in real time so they can guide their wires and tubes. And I was in incredible pain, sort of kidney stone level pain. And this one nurse was so wonderful. They couldn't sedate me, but the power of human touch is so extraordinary and almost beyond measuring. Like she held my hand and she said, "Breathe with me." This happened a couple of times during this long, long night, and she calmed me down. The pain subsided. Like the effect of that was, I mean, I feel like I'd take that over fentanyl, right? I mean, it really, really worked, and you mustn't forget that component of it because the patient is a very, very alone, and that connection is vital, and probably to their survival. So at any rate, this went on for hours, and then finally, my memory is that the doctors, the vascular surgeon and the interventional radiologist, they were sort of working as a team. And I think had this not worked, the vascular surgeon would have taken me downstairs to the OR and done his best on me, and they would have called my wife to sort of say goodbye if that was what happened, because the outcomes might have been really bad. So, but my memory was the interventional radiologist, Dr. Dombrowski, extremely experienced and innovative and amazing, and he straight up saved my life. He basically was like, "Well, we've done everything, it's not working. We've done everything we can." And the other doctor sort of nodded, and I couldn't believe it. I was like, "What do you mean not working? Like, I'm just in for belly pain. Just fix this so I can go home." I couldn't believe it, right? Then Dr. Dombrowski, my memory is he said, or maybe we can try going through his left wrist. And then the other doctor, my memory is he said, I like the way you think. And then they started working on my wrist and that worked. I was such an extraordinary thing to hear the doctors deliberating. Like patients don't usually get to hear that. And doctors might even forget that's, it's like the children are listening, like careful what you say around the children. Yeah, I'm all ears. I'm very invested in the outcome here. The other thing I would say, just as a sort of advice, is that, to save my life, I was on the fluoroscope for hours and I got radiation burns. It was like a light sunburn on my back. And I knew it was unnatural because it was a perfect square, right? And I showed it to my wife and it was radiation burns and she was pretty upset about it. And I tried to joke about it. I was like, well, listen, we can call it square noble, right? And the joke did not work at all. So my first piece of advice is don't do that with your spouse. You won't humor them out of a alarming situation. But no, but the other serious point is that, of course, later I was very, very traumatized. I almost died. For a year or two, I was way more anxious and sort of agoraphobic and paranoid than I ever was coming back from combat, which I've done many times in my life. I suddenly seized on this idea that in saving my life, they might have exposed me to so much radiation that now I'm going to die of cancer. And then I did some research and I found out that actually the exposure is totally manageable. It doesn't really change the numbers. Like you're good, you're fine, right? People who have almost died are going to be extremely anxious and paranoid about their bodies and about doctors and health and everything. And the more you can tell them you got this much radiation and these are the numbers you have to have that conversation because otherwise you could live for years with this sort of terrible paranoia that the universe missed you once, but it's going to track you down and get you again. And it's magical thinking, but humans are very prone to magical thinking, and it's extremely troubling.
Yeah, no, that's a very great point that you put. I think on the medical side of things, we do have a difficulty sometimes with communicating with patients about everything that they're sort of experiencing and going through, and also what we're experiencing and going through. But without question, there should be avenues and areas to talk and bounce ideas off of and help patients, in their time of need, not just acutely, but also sort of long-term and chronically to help manage those types of thoughts and situations without question.
And I think this is why we have these conversations on Read Talk Grow, because maybe somebody would say to you, oh, how lucky that you survived. And they wouldn't have a concept of really how difficult it is on the tail end of it as you're then walking in the woods in your remote property and thinking, what if something comes up and now I'm again isolated? And so we have to understand the story to understand how that can be a big challenge as well. There's another set of heroes in this story that I want to make sure we mention. While you are losing blood, they call a code crimson, which means everybody in the hospital needs to help mobilize blood to get it to you. But you wouldn't be able to receive that blood if that blood hadn't been donated. So I just wanted to make sure that during this episode, I don't know if one of you would comment on the importance of people donating blood and having stores of blood in case emergencies occur.
Yeah, I would love to, if I may, because it's a very important point for me. I survived because of great medical care, and 10 people donated a pint of blood. 10 people I'll never meet saved my life, allowed my daughters to have a father, my wife to have a husband. I never thought about blood donation before. And then after this, like, oh my God, we must donate blood because eventually you're going to be on the gurney, right? Your daughter, your spouse, your friend, like we're all going to be that person needing blood. You must donate. And I thought of it in even broader terms. Like live in this big, wealthy, amazing country, right? 325 million people. Like what could any one of us do to help to do anything for this country? The country doesn't need me, right? It's one of the demoralizing things about living in a mass society, right? And actually, that's not true. We cannot manufacture blood. Like we need you to donate blood or people will die, children will die. And while I'm on a roll, we need you to serve in jury duty. AI can't do that for you. You need to serve in jury duty. If you're ever accused of a crime, you deserve to have a jury of your peers, and you will get one no matter what. But you won't deserve one if you don't serve on jury duty. And finally, vote. Those three things are easy to do, and taken together, they make you feel like you're part of something and part of something grand, something great, which is this country. When I donate blood every 3 or 4 months. And honestly, like it's such a good feeling. They treat you like a hero. You get Oreo cookies and a juice drink, and you go home feeling like a good person. Like that's a straight up win in like in every regard, you know. So like please, please do it.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that. I gave blood yesterday actually, and I got some chocolate, little covered coconut macaroon. So if not for the altruistic reason that Sebastian says, do it for the Oreos and the chocolates.
You heard it here first. A lot of the book is about the near-death experience. In fact, much of the book that we've talked about happens very early in the book, where we look at the medical aspects, and I wanted that to be the focus of the conversation. But before we wrap up, I'm hoping you both will make some comments about this coming close to death or near-death experience, what we don't know, what's happening in the body, and then we'll wrap up.
I woke up in the ICU, and the nurse told me, "You almost died last night. In fact, it's kind of a miracle that you made it." The first thing that went through my mind, I remembered seeing my dead father. Like, oh my God, I saw my dead father in the pit. Like, I had no idea I'd almost died, right? I woke up to this terrible news. So when I got home, I started researching it because I was very unnerved by what I'd seen on the threshold and by the dream that I'd had prior that I had died. And I started researching it and come to find out, like, it's a very, very common experience. And not just in, crisis moments like I was in, but people in hospice care, older people in their 80s who are dying. Hospice nurses will tell you that it's very, very common in the last days and hours for the dying person to be actively in communication with the dead, right? Like I was with my father, like they're there in the room, right? No one else can see them. There's lots of neurological explanations for the white light and the tunnel and floating above the out of body experience. There's all kinds of things that happen in near death experiences that are sort of explainable through neurochemistry and neurology of the distressed and dying brain. And I'm a rationalist, and I bought all of that. The only thing that I didn't quite understand how it would work was the uniformity of the vision of seeing the dead, even with people that don't know they're dying, don't understand they're dying. And for me, that what that opens up is it's not for me a gateway to Christianity. I'm still an atheist, but it's a gateway to the sort of acknowledgement that as amazing as our scientists are, as brilliant as they are, our physicists, we just may not understand anything, or we may understand very little about the physical nature of the universe and of consciousness and of life and of death. We just might not have the beginning of a clue of what that reality is at the quantum level, which of course is the ultimate level of all things. So the book sort of explores those possibilities, and they're possibilities not espoused by mystics and saints, right? These are possibilities espoused by physicists themselves, who are like, consciousness is a strange thing. It affects everything at the quantum level, and the universe might be one massive consciousness that we all participate in minute amounts as our individual selves. It's a totally plausible theory. And those are the kinds of things I play around with towards the end of the book, trying to understand this incredibly bizarre and ultimately, for me at least, terrifying vision that I'd had.
Yeah, I think the latter part of your book is, super fascinating because it tries to tie in, to your point, the metaphysical, the spiritual, the rationalization. You mentioned throughout the book your father being a physicist. You mentioned, you're a rational atheist. I too consider myself along those lines. So I read it with great fascination. And it really is telling how people are always looking for, quote unquote, the God particle, right? The essence of being this consciousness. I think you do a fantastic job of trying to, in your own personal way, trying to decipher what meaning is, what consciousness is. And you do it in such an interesting way, tying in sort of personal stories. You just do a fascinating job. Without question, a great read.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'll just briefly comment that, unlike the two of you, I do come from a religious and a spiritual background and do believe in a higher power. And I find the exploration to just be that, an exploration and a questioning. So, for our listeners who are in all camps, essentially, I think this is a very approachable way to look at this question of what you just said, Sebastian, that we just may not understand anything when it comes to consciousness, life, and death. I want to thank you both so much for being here with me today to talk about In My Time of Dying. I hope listeners will go out and read the book. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Read Talk Grow is a product of the Women's Health Center at Mayo Clinic. This episode was made possible by the generous support of Ken Stevens. Our producer is Lisa Speckhard-Pask, and our recording engineer is Rick Andreessen. Visit our show notes to see the books discussed today and for links to other health education materials. Follow us on social media like Instagram and Facebook, or reach out directly to our email, readtalkgrow@mayo.edu, with suggestions for books or topic ideas. We'd love to hear from you. This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not designed to replace a physician's medical assessment and judgment. Information presented should not be relied on as medical advice. Please contact a healthcare professional for medical assistance if needed for questions pertaining to your own health. Keep reading, everyone.